Hey everyone, this is M. Glad with Spurlock. Welcome to another episode of REIT Ball. Tune in. We have an exciting two guests this week. So we're ready to go. If you are, stay tuned. Here we go.
We're back.
We are back. What's up, Spurlock? How's it going, sir?
Man, it's doing good, doing good. Sunny days out here, so enjoying it. And it's Friday. It's Friday.
That's right. It's been a heck of a week, but I'm glad to wrap it up the way that we're wrapping it up. I'm thrilled to have not just one, but we have two guests today for REIT Ball. Couldn't be more excited. I'm always grateful for having any guests on REIT Ball, but today this is a special one. I can tell you we have the Peebles Corporation. We have the CEO and the Chief of Staff, Mr. Don Peebles and Donahue Peebles on today. I followed, as many of us, I followed Mr. Peebles' career, throughout my career and saw all of his accomplishments. It was interesting when doing the intro. I could do an entire segment about his life story and his intro, but I can say that there's a lot of resources out there for you to check out. He obviously has books available. He also has online interviews. One in particular I found, I don't know the gentleman, but his name is Vince Harris. If you go to YouTube and see Vince Harris's interview with Mr. Peebles, it talks a lot about the personal side, his life story, coming from humble beginnings and really just building this empire. And it really just motivates all of us and tells us that, hey, with enough grit, determination, we can do phenomenal things. So I encourage you all to kind of jump over to, online to different resources to hear about the personal aspects of Mr. Peebles. We'll stick to the real estate side for the most part, as well as some fun sports topics. And I want to make sure that we have some actionable items where you can take some of the things that they bring up in the interview and maybe consider those for your real estate exposure through REITs long-term when you think about your different investments. So with that said, the Peebles Corporation, largest Black-owned real estate development firm, projects across the U.S., including New York City, Miami, D.C., Charlotte, Boston, and L.A., to name a few. Their portfolio includes mixed-use, residential, hotel developments, offices, and they have two very impressive new developments that they're planning. One in Charlotte called the Brooklyn Village and the Angels Landing in LA. Massive developments on the way. One of the more interesting developments and assets in their portfolio is called the Bath Club in Miami. So this was opened in the early 1900s, and it was essentially a whites-only social club. So Mr. Peebles became the first member of the Bath Club. He took it a step further and decided to buy the asset. So now they own the Bath Club as part of their portfolio, I believe, since 1999. And currently, the Peebles Corporation is raising $500 million in equity to support diverse managers, diverse real estate developers, which we'll talk about this episode. So, having said all that, why don't we bring them on and get started?
Let's do it.
Gentlemen, welcome on. Welcome to the show. Welcome to REIT Ball.
Welcome, guys.
It's a pleasure to be here, guys. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Good to be here. Thanks for the kind introduction as well.
Absolutely. I had to decide where to cut it off. There's just so much to talk about. So you've done a phenomenal job kind of leading the way for the next generation. So it'll be exciting to be able to talk about, what you've accomplished, and then Donahue, the next generation, kind of filling in the gap and just carrying it forward. So I'm excited to have you both on. So as I mentioned before the show, we're going to have 4 rounds. We'll talk about leadership. We'll talk about finding opportunities during crisis. We'll talk about diversity and the future of real estate, and then we'll wrap it up with a fun sports debate topic toward the end. So any questions before we get you in the fire?
No, we're all
ready to go. Cool. First, starting off with leadership. Spurlock, I'm sorry, you had something?
No, I was gonna say let's hop into it.
Let's make it. Okay, cool. So leadership, Mr. Peebles, we'll start right into it. Obviously, a multi-billion-dollar enterprise you built for years, going through obviously different economic cycles. What would you say is different about this pandemic, and what have you learned from a leadership and a tenant relations perspective? And what have the past kind of recessions really prepared? How have they prepared you for this pandemic?
Well, interestingly enough, the unfortunate aspect of this crisis that we're in now is that the loss of life and the health risk to so many people And so obviously that is very different than having a financial crisis or a real estate crisis that doesn't result in the loss of life. This pandemic has had that type of impact. However, one of the things that from a business perspective that is different in this pandemic is that it's coming to an end. And so it's coming to an end. It is coming into an end in the coming months ahead. So we know that it will end. The question is, what disruptors has it accelerated? If you look at what businesses are prospering right now, companies like Amazon, other tech companies that were already disrupting many aspects of our economy have just accelerated that process. I think technology in terms of how we are interacting, like right now, that will get accelerated and has been accelerated. So there will be some short-term changes. And the challenge, I think, in terms of a business and a real estate perspective of how we look at, coming out of this and where the opportunities are, it's predicting what changes in our behavior, what changes in our consumption of real estate are longer lasting and what are shorter lasting. And then those that are longer lasting, how do you capitalize on those? And then where do you make your bets on the short-term impact?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that any crisis is not a good crisis, right? But when you think about the silver lining, it does build character. It can make you stronger. You can find these different opportunities. Can't deny the last 08, 09 crisis. We were building a new business at Bank of America when we were responsible for restructuring the countrywide portfolio. So restructuring all those loans, client facing, had to build a new division. And I would say it's one of the most stressful times of my life. It's probably where I lose my hair. But at the same time, it kind of built that character into now making me stronger during times like this and being a stronger leader. So I think it does, while it is bad for any crisis, there are some benefits to being able to withstand a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also one of the things is withstanding the crisis and then looking for the opportunities that are presented as a result of a crisis. So you put again, in this crisis, what we have is a health risk. And there, I don't think any of us want to profit from someone's misfortune there. But then we have a behavioral change that's been associated with that and figuring out how to prosper and where the opportunities are there. Far too often, I talk about this in my books, and I've talked about this throughout my career, and it's a way that I've tried to conduct my business is when there's a crisis or a setback that comes, I don't retreat. What we've tried to do is look for the opportunities, because I believe that every setback, every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. And so it's up to us to see that. I mean, in boxing, the most dangerous puncher is a counterpuncher, because if they can keep their head after their opponent is swung, then they see their opponent's open and they can knock them out. And so I think the same thing in business. These opportunities, these crises, these challenges, these setbacks present great opportunities. And so those of us who see them, I think, will prosper. And I think I think the other issue is, of course, this pandemic has raised an issue that is long needed to have been brought up, and that is economic equality for African Americans and equal protection and equal opportunity and equal access to the American dream for Black Americans, and what that means and how we need to structurally change our economy. And I think that will be the best thing that comes out of this pandemic, because without this pandemic, I do not believe that we would have seen the extreme focus on the prior and past and current treatment of African Americans when it comes to criminal justice and when it comes to equal access to all of the pillars of our great democracy. And today, that is one of the top topics of businesses around the country, being them large global businesses, mid-size or small. And I don't believe that would have taken place without us being in this kind of crisis where Americans were so in tune to social media and so in tune to what was happening around them.
No, I agree. These are valid points, all strong points. So Donahue, obviously, you haven't had as much experience as far as going through different economic cycles. So it'd be interesting to hear your perspective, related to doing business during volatile times. Like, what have you learned? What advice would you give maybe new entrepreneurs that are just entering the industry during a time of uncertainty? How has that been for you?
Absolutely. I think it calls into question two things. One, I think it further exacerbates the primacy of having business leaders be both leaders in business, but also social leaders. And the obligation that businesses have, not just to their shareholders from a fiduciary sense, but also to the communities that they inhabit, the communities that they influence. I think what this crisis has done is laid bare the dislocation between the equity markets and the everyday individual. And I think that hopefully we'll do something to change that, so that, as the S&P goes, so do the American people, and we don't continue to have this K-shaped recovery. So what I hope happens, and there's a consumer behavior change with every economic recession, with every sort of challenge. I think you look at the Great Depression, it's spend not, want not. You look at the recession in '08 or the Great Recession, and you see renting as opposed to home ownership, more transient workforce, and the continued trend of urbanization. I think here we'll see two things. One, I think we'll see a continued trend of deurbanization and a dislocated workforce, or a dispersed workforce. But secondarily, I think we'll see a citizenry that is much more conversant in the language of economics and how economics affect policy and social outcomes. And what I love is that in times of distress, particularly economic distress, politics moves to the forefront. And at each instance, we've opened our economy and made it more inclusive. And hopefully this is an inflection point where the social gains we win far outweigh the economic costs we're forced to bear.
No, that's a strong response. Yeah, I think what I wonder is, you look at the stock market and it just currently is not aligned with all of the true distress and the true pain that a lot of folks are experiencing. So I wonder, do stocks eventually become too expensive for Main Street to even own shares? And I hope not. But
I don't think so, right? Main Street will always be able to enter the equity markets, or retail investors will always be able to enter the equity markets. You look at all the stock splits that have occurred as valuations have risen. So from a gross dollar perspective, I don't think that they'll be shut out. I think two things. I think two things are really interesting. I think valuations are rich, but valuations are rich because we live in a time of loose monetary policy. Jerome Powell's done a great job on the monetary policy side to shore up the American economy. The issue really is that that loose monetary policy benefits businesses and corporations whose shareholders themselves are other businesses and corporations or high net worth individuals. And so that growth in value, that growth in valuation, or the extra M1 is going directly to those at the top of the totem pole and not to those at the bottom. And so when we say a K-shaped recovery, it's that those at the top go up, but those at the bottom are going down. And I see that reflected when we're not seeing inflation, when PPI remains stagnant, or even we see some deflation, because those who are at the bottom, who are going down, have a much higher marginal propensity to spend dollars.
Absolutely. No,
but yeah,
very valuable.
I think that there's a policy solution that likely makes a more equitable nation. And America's at its best when inequality is at its worst, or inequality is at its least. And so hopefully we'll be able to return to where we were in the mid 60s and early 70s with respect to inequality. Interesting.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Spurlock, you're up.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Mr. Peebles or Donahue. Since REIT Ball is catering to the beginning investors with potential interest of eventually doing their own projects, is either of you willing to share a major career failure early on in your career? What happened, and how did it mold you into the person you are today?
An awkward failure question.
No. we learn from our failures. And I think if, as an entrepreneur, if you have not failed several times, then you're really not pushing the envelope. So give you a sense. I mean, I quit college after my freshman year. I wanted to be a doctor, and I was going to go into pre-med and become a doctor and emulate my uncle. And so I could have a nice quality of life and play it safe. And I changed my mind after my freshman year, and I went back to Washington, D.C. And that was 1979. So interest rates were over 20%. So imagine qualifying for a $100,000 mortgage. Your interest cost alone was $20,000.
Wow.
So, so very few people could qualify. So my first failures were selling homes, being excited that I'd get people to sign a contract, but then being severely disappointed because they could not qualify. And then I went into the appraisal business and learned there. So so in terms of in my career, I spent my early 20s working as an appraiser and then starting my own appraisal business. And I had some very good fortune. So pretty much things were going along as planned. However, my first two visions were for real estate development in Washington, D.C., which is where I started the company, were right in front of me and where my office was and where I lived. So my office was in Georgetown. My appraisal business was in Georgetown. There was a vacant incinerator where they used to burn trash, the Georgetown incinerator. So I approached the city of Washington, D.C. in 1984, 1985 maybe, to buy that incinerator and convert it to a hotel, retail, and some apartments. I could never get traction. I thought I got some traction, and I could never get them to do it. Now, about 10 blocks down the street, I lived at 25th and M Street in Washington, D.C. And out my window, I was seeing the development of 3 hotels on the 3 of the 4 corners of 24th and M Street. And then on L Street, there was a old library, the West End Library, and a police substation where the motorcycles were stored that escorted motorcades of the president and so forth. And so I thought a better use of that was to put the motorcycles down in the basement, build a new building, build a library on the ground floor, and then take advantage of the air rights above. So I approached the city of Washington, D.C., which was run by my mentor, Marion Barry, the mayor of the city, and offered a deal to buy that site. And that went far. And I assembled some investors for that. And ultimately, the deal didn't get done. And so, however, the investors I met, we became friends and we learned, got to know each other. And then within maybe 6 or 8 months from that time, a new opportunity came about. And then I used those investors and brought them in. And we developed my first office building in Anacostia in Washington, D.C., called 2100 Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. And Donahue and our team are overseeing the renovation of that building, where we still own it and the city lives in it today. So that setback was an opportunity. The setback was, hey, I didn't get a deal done. But the opportunity that was created was that I had found a capital source for the next deal. So you've got to find the opportunity within the setbacks. And just to remind myself of the opportunities that got away from me, whenever I go to Washington, D.C., by the way, just to get fast forward, a white developer came around about a decade and a half, 2 decades later, and proposed developing the Georgetown incinerator site to a hotel and residential development, and of course got it done. And the city thanked him for taking their property, and it's the Georgetown Ritz-Carlton, and then the West End Library got redeveloped as I proposed back in the mid 1980s as a library and a condo development above it. Wow. And that just got completed. It took them until I guess, 2017, 2018 to develop that site. So both of the sites, my vision was ahead of my time. But whenever I go to Washington, D.C., I stay in the Ritz-Carlton in Georgetown, where I can remind myself that I should have tried a little harder to persuade the city and made more noise. And I've toured the West End Library site, and I try to drive by that every time as well, to remind myself as well. And but I tell you that, you learn a lot from those experiences, and you learn much more from them than the failures. And it taught me some important lessons over time. But those were the first two big failures that I could say happened. And I'll give you the last one, because I think the last one was the most transformative for me. And so fast forward, I obviously went on to build another building and started building my business up in DC. So the basketball story is the Washington Wizards, which were the Bullets. And then they became the Wizards, and they were playing in Landover, Maryland. So the city of Washington, the owner of the Wizards was a real estate developer, Abe Poland, the then owner. He wanted to move the team in downtown to DC, because downtown had recovered all the economic development efforts of downtown. It was a hot location. So he wanted to move his basketball team into the city. So the city took back a development site owned in part by one of the most prominent Black entrepreneurs at the time, Billy Fitzgerald, who owned Independence Federal Savings Bank, which was then the largest Black-owned bank in the city. This is 1994. So in order to build the arena, they had to tear down 3 government office buildings. And they were going to do this with all taxpayer money. So they had to move those government employees somewhere else. At that point in time, I, along with some institutional investors, had bought 3 buildings in downtown DC. This was at the tail end of the savings and loan and banking crisis of the early 90s. So we bought these buildings for a song. So I said, this is great. We are going to lease these buildings to the city, get rid of 2 buildings fully leased and make some money and move on. And around that time, there was a political election. The mayor of Washington, Barry, had left office and kind of in disgrace for drug use, and had come back, and he was campaigning to come back. He won. The incumbent mayor lost. So the white media was so outraged that Barry had come back that they started trying to strip him from his power right away, as did the Congress. So we made a deal to the city, and because Barry was a mentor of mine, the media tried to make it like it was some kind of inside deal. So the city hires this consulting firm to evaluate the proposals, because it was a white developer that the city wanted to give the deal to, but we upset the apple cart because we outbid them. So consultant, examines it, and they testify before the city council and say the city would be a fool not to take the Peebles deals, because they're $58 million cheaper over 11 years than the other building. And by the way, backdrop there, the city was insolvent and a financial authority had taken over. So no way I should not have won that deal. And this was my wife had just given birth to our young son, who's sitting up here talking to us.
Here's good luck.
In my future, I'm going to own all these buildings in downtown DC, and no one could beat us. $58 million less expensive. Nobody could beat us. The Washington Post and the media zeroed in on me. My first live television appearance came as a result of that on Fox News, because they were attacking me too. And so I had to go and defend it. And one night, it was right around my wife's birthday is September 11th, and our wedding anniversary is September 12th. So I'm sitting in the kitchen with my little toddler infant on the counter, talking to my wife, eating a snack after trying to push this deal through, and the news comes on. It says live at 11, coming up at news at 11, the mayor is going to be pulling Don Peebles' lease from the city council. I'm like, what?
Wow. And that's how you found out.
That deal got pulled. And I said, oh my God, what am I going to do now if I can't win in my own hometown that's supposed to be supporting Black business people? and I'm $58 million less expensive. And by the way, I was not $58 million less expensive intentionally. 10 million would have been just as good. And so I took a vacation and went to Florida with my wife, and we went to South Beach that had just opened up the Delano Hotel there. And then I looked around, saw cranes going up, and I said, wow, this could be an opportunity. And we got a vacation home there. And a couple months later, we were down there for the Christmas holidays, and I read a newspaper article, and it was a story that mentioned the Royal Palm City was doing an RFP for the Royal Palm Hotel. And then I told my wife, we're going to bid on that hotel, we're going to win that hotel, and we're going to change our lives. And I'm never going to be dependent upon this double standard that I saw in Washington, D.C. ever again. And that was right around, that was in December 1995. By June 1996, I won the rights to develop the Royal Palm Hotel, which became the first major hotel in the United States owned by African-American developers and built by African-American developers. And that changed my entire career. If it wasn't that I got screwed over by the unfair system of Washington, D.C., which still exists, by the way, I would be running around worried about who's on the city council or who became mayor there, and whether the Washington Post is going to write another story negatively about Black business people. And instead, I went on to build a company that's built billions of dollars of development and has a $4 billion development pipeline. So again, great opportunity comes from setbacks as long as you're open to the opportunities that present themselves. So the old saying, one door closes, another door opens. DC closed for me and another door opened. And that's just basically what happened. And I started selling everything there. And I sold by within 3 years, I sold everything. The market had risen up and I kept 2,100 for sentimental reasons.
That's awesome.
No, and for the listeners, again, buy the books. I mean, a lot of this is just one of the stories. There's so many gems in there you can learn from. And I remember reading, your transition to Miami, and it gave me goosebumps. You took that tough time, that tough chapter in your career, and made something amazing out of it. So great lessons to be learned there. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
So let's switch over to this second round of creating opportunities during crisis. And you talked a little bit about it. So it'll be interesting to hear kind of specifically how you look at it from Peebles Corporation. And Donahue, feel free to chime in as well. So naturally, Blackstone recently closed an $8 billion debt fund, right? It's the largest in history in anticipation for distressed opportunities due to COVID. So, when we cover REIT Ball, we talk about long-term value and opportunity. Retail and lodging has been destroyed on the REIT side and in the industry as a whole. But long-term, we expect things to rebound. So where does, Peebles Corporation, where do you think you can unlock the most value, the biggest opportunities because of the pandemic specifically?
We'll both take this, but I think from my perspective, I think one of the things that we focused on throughout our company's history is public-private partnerships. I believe that, there are massive job losses here as a result of the pandemic. And there are many jobs and many businesses that will not come back. And so it will be a significant effort. It will take a significant effort from cities, states, and municipal governments and our federal government to kickstart our economy in terms of a way that the recovery is more broadly distributed. And I think that will come from infrastructure investments and large-scale development. And that will be public-private large-scale developments. And we're positioning ourselves to be able to compete in a space that we have competed very effectively in for 36 years in terms of public-private competitive opportunities. And so that'll be one of the key areas that we compete in, and we see that as an opportunity. I have never been an entrepreneur that likes to take advantage of other people's misfortunes. Back even in the early 90s when I bought properties from the banks in Washington, D.C., I went to the people who had lost the properties and gave them an opportunity to come back into the deal, because I don't like to dance trades. I do believe, and I know that capitalism is essentially blind, but I do believe how I make my money is very important, and more important than what I make is how I do it. And so it's been very important to me to do it in a way that's a positive way, to where I'm adding value to the equation, and our company's adding value, as opposed to me sucking some value away because of somebody's misfortune, which in this instance, no one deserves what's happening to them as a result of this economic crisis, because this is a global pandemic. And so I kind of find it almost unseeming to profit from other people's misfortune here. I almost think it's unpatriotic to do that. And so we're not going to do that. So Donahue has some other perspectives on this as well. So
absolutely. Absolutely. I think the trend of urbanization that is really been present since the late 1960s is about to reverse itself, as firms have recognized that they're not seeing the same productivity losses from a distributed workforce that they anticipated. I think they start rethinking long-term, expensive urban core office leases and begin to find more cost-effective solutions to maintain productivity and keep a cohesive workforce. So what that means now is that the sacrifices that you're making to raise a family in New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, even Washington, D.C. metro area to some degree, are going to begin to seem untenable. And you're going to see folks move from the urban core to the suburbs and to the hinterlands. And that means two things. That means that I think multifamily living has seen its peak and will dissipate to some degree over the coming decades. And the rise of single-family residences adjacent to urban communities will once again be the primary means of residential living for folks. That has an outsized effect on commercial office leasing and retail leasing in urban cores that have really been the backbone of this real estate revolution. And then lastly, I think hospitality. I mean, hospitality has really been eaten up. Drive-to destinations have rebounded to some degree, as has domestic tourism, which is exceptional. I think with a vaccine, we'll likely see more international tourism, which bodes well for cities like New York, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles. But I think a big challenge and something that hospitality owners are going to have to contend with is an erosion of group business. I think business travel is something that is no longer as necessary or as perceived as necessary as it once was with the rise of Zoom conferences. I mean, even how we're communicating now, the first class flight from New York to LA to go meet with a client no longer seems like an appropriate allocation of capital. And so large convention center hotels or hotels that rely primarily on group or transient business of some sort are likely going to suffer, and there'll be a decrease in aggregate room nights, particularly in urban cores.
So now from a personal perspective, and I'm assuming your personal investments outside of like the Peebles thesis, would that be aligned with your thoughts as well when you think about outside of the Peebles Corporation, maybe smaller investments that you're considering? Would it still be along those same lines?
To some degree, I think what I try to do is stay near business cycle agnostic demand generators. And so I like to think of reasons why people live there that don't correlate with the typical business cycle. So educational institutions, medical institutions are two primary examples. I think military institutions as well are great. Government contracting is exceptional. And I try to co-locate around those demand generators and then do so in a way that I think aligns more with my macro view. So today that seems like single family residences, and that seems like subsidized multifamily housing. And I think there's a movement away from equity and into the debt space to mitigate your downside risk. I still think that many urban cores are supply constrained, actually suffering from like really artificial supply constraints within the multifamily markets. And so there's a tremendous amount of non-mobile renters that need heavy subsidy in order to continue to live where they are. And so I think the low-income housing tax credit solutions are great. I think investing in buildings with existing HAP contracts are very good as well. And you can do that in places where they're seeing a net decrease in residents just because the dislocation in the housing market is so severe that it will take decades in order to really get housing to trade at somewhere that approximates replacement cost.
Now, keep you keep you on the microphone for a second. So, kind of tied to your dad hinted at the disruption in technology, and we're talking about we're doing more FaceTime, more Zoom calls, and things like that. And you look at real estate; it's been an older industry where a lot of technology, until more recently, has not really happened. It's been one of the laggards when you think about all the new technology and the disruption, right? You've had kind of the co-working space and things like that, but true like technology implemented into assets, it's taken a little while. So you being the younger generation, you know, and with prop tech on the rise, are you an advocate of prop tech? Are you a believer? Are you not a believer? And, you know, do you think that, you know, how do you think it'll have the biggest impact on the built world as we move forward?
Oh, absolutely a believer, but particularly on the data side. I think that our ability to aggregate and understand data is going to inform investment theses across the financial markets, but in particular real estate, where the markets have been so opaque for so long that they've allowed folks to see huge kind of swings in value in very, very short periods of time. So I think looking at data as to which markets, which asset classes, and even which blocks are poised to see value increases or value decreases is something that a lot of firms are working on, and it's really, really interesting. I think secondarily on the development side, two things are fascinating to me. One, technology is great at working within discrete rules and optimizing for discrete values, which is exactly what we do when we use zoning regulations to determine highest and best use. And given a set of inputs and any particular property type, there's no reason why we need to contact an architect to determine what the most advantageous use is, and more importantly, what your gross buildable can be on a per use basis and how to mesh those uses together. And there are already technologies that do that, particularly in New York City and the Bay Area, that are fascinating. And
is envelope one of those? I think
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly.
Yeah.
I very much like. I mean, it's incredible, and it's a time saver. It's exceptionally accurate, and it provides insights that I don't think are necessarily intuitive. I think as human beings, we like to look at something within a paradigm as to how we've initially perceived it, and computers cast a much wider net and are able to come up with very unintuitive, very unique solutions that maximize value in ways that we'd miss.
No, I agree. I think that there's a lot. I think there's like 7,000 to 8,000 early stage prop tech startups out there around the globe. Probably 99% of them, are maybe more on like the tenant experience, not truly transformative, but the ones that you're talking about, true data aggregation, analysis. I just think those are going to be the ones that truly change the industry for us.
Oh, absolutely, and hopefully, someone will figure out something equally transformative on the construction side. I mean, you see all these prefab homes going up. I think that works for single family residences, but we're just not quite at an inflection point where it's really become a game changer. I mean, hopefully in the next decade or so, we can see sort of prefab multifamily buildings and something very, very substantial come about.
Absolutely. I agree with Donahue on that latter part about the innovation in terms of prefabrication. Interestingly enough, by the way, single-family prefabrication is not new. Sears and Roebuck used to have kit homes back in the 1950s, and so. But I do think we're going to see a much greater expansion of modular homes and single-family. There's several companies right now, by the way, that are in the multifamily space in terms of mid-rise. They're multifamily and hospitality where they work best, to where they're cookie cutters. But I think if you look at real estate from a construction perspective, because real estate's a pretty simplistic business, and so technology advancements are just going to make it more efficient in terms of how you execute design, how you market, how you reach your tenants, how you reach your consumers, and so forth. But the most archaic aspect of real estate is, imagine Ferrari. You order a Ferrari and they ship the parts piece by piece to your garage. and they install a couple technicians in your garage. And every morning these people come to work and they work on assembling the car in your garage. Think about how inefficient that is. I mean, so that's what real estate construction and development is that they're assembling the entire project on site. And and so that will change. And I think that will make housing more affordable and much more efficient, and frankly increase many aspects of quality. And I think that if you look at where the future opportunities are right now for the smaller investor, real estate, for the life of me, I cannot really understand, other than the proliferation of so many media outlets, as to why there's such a focus on the big institutional aspects of real estate, or what our company does. I mean, our company, has 4 or 5 projects at any given time, but the business is driven by the entrepreneur. This is an entrepreneurial business, and it really changed from being an entrepreneurial business at every aspect. Because if you look at New York City, if you went back to 1989, 1990, and look at who the developers were, they were entrepreneurial developers who actually were generational developers in many instances, but they were individuals. The biggest developer in New York City was Harry Helmsley, and he was an entrepreneurial developer. And across Washington, D.C., the biggest developers and the biggest property owners were individual entrepreneurs. But after the banking and S&L crises, the capitalization of real estate changed. So, for example, prior to the banking crises, you could go to a bank as a developer and borrow 90% of appraised value as completed, or cost, whichever was higher. And so a developer didn't need private equity. It was only when the market recovered and banks started cutting the loan to value ratios down to 65 to 70%, then to build a $200 million building all of a sudden required $60-70 million of cash. Developers are not heavy on cash because their capital gets locked up into buildings. And so as a result, they had to go to Wall Street to get that. And Wall Street extracted more than a higher interest rate. They extracted equity as a result of that. And that was the institutionalization of our business. But our business has been poorly served by that. And if you look at the excessive cost of housing that is in the run-up of the cost of workforce and affordable housing, it has been, you can link it back to the early 1990s and the way capitalization of real estate changes. So I think we've got to get back to the individual entrepreneurs. And as you see this shift into the suburbs, as you see this shift into single family homes, for example, then that provides significant opportunity for the entrepreneurial investor and the small investor. And so I would encourage people who are thinking about real estate now to be looking at the surrounding areas of metropolitan locations, to where they can build more cost-effective housing, or go in and buy and renovate, because that business is very hard for some investment bankers sitting in an office on 55th Street in Midtown Manhattan to go and execute. Yeah. And so hopefully that will shift some of this back to the individual entrepreneur.
Now that's a fascinating, being on the quote unquote mom and pop side of the business, that's a fascinating timeline. I wasn't as aware of when that actually shifted and specifically why. So hopefully the listeners, they can appreciate that piece as well. It's because I think you're right. Now, when you think about real estate, it is about Wall Street, private equity, getting the big check, and a lot less of the smaller mom and pop projects.
So by the way, many of those firms like Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, didn't even exist yet. And Blackstone had just started. And so you had these firms that started popping up in the private equity space. And that changed everything. It took the power and the ownership of real estate out of the entrepreneur's hands. And because of how the capital stack changed in an industry unrelated to real estate per se, it was the junk bond crises that triggered this, and the S&L had owned a lot of junk bonds through Drexel Burnham, which Mike Milken ran. And that triggered this insolvency of these banks and savings and loans, and it just changed everything. And as a result, we basically run the entrepreneurial developers have almost become employees of private equity.
Yes, it's very true. Very true. Such a valuable perspective, and interesting to think, me being on the other side to see that. So thank you for that piece. In the next round, we're going to transition to diversity and the future of real estate. And while you're on, we have to talk about the fund. I think it's, and again, Donahue, I want you to chime in as well, because I know this is a collective effort from Peebles Corporation and you're equally passionate about it. So for the folks listening, Peebles Corporation announced that they're raising a $500 million equity fund to support more diverse real estate professionals, entrepreneurs. So I really want to understand, why did you decide, Peebles Corporation doesn't need to do anything, right? I mean, you pretty much built this empire. You could finish the projects you're working on now and kind of go about your business and do whatever you want to do. Why did you decide that to raise the fund, that now is the time to raise the fund? And I know there's probably been some pushback. Can you talk about maybe the common objections that you face when raising the capital so that, we as real estate entrepreneurs, we can try to prove those naysayers wrong and make you look good and be success and help you succeed in this first fund?
I appreciate that. I mean, look, I think that when I was born, where I grew up, and how I got started has determined my outlook on business. I was born in 1960. That was at the epicenter in terms of time of the civil rights movement. I was born and raised primarily in Washington, D.C., with about 5 years in Detroit, Michigan. So I was mindful of the civil rights movement. I remember when Dr. King was assassinated. I remembered that the expectation was everything was much harder for Black Americans. But I remember there was a sense of optimism. And I remember that people like Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King gave their lives for a better life for us. And then I saw in Washington, D.C. and Detroit, Michigan, I mean, growing up, my best friend's father was Barry Gordy, who founded and was the head of Motown Records. I saw Black business people, Black doctors, Black political leaders, and so forth. So I saw that there was a great opportunity that lied ahead, but I understood it was hard fought and hard to get there. And of course, as I got older and more knowledgeable, I was well aware of the major sacrifices that people had made before me, so that the opportunity that I got and that I've had as a result of them, and how they gave their lives and risked their lives. So many people sacrificed their lives for all of us to do better. And so I felt that there was a greater responsibility for each of us, and me included, as to what I did with my life and what I did in terms of having an impact on society. And so I felt that, when as an aspiring entrepreneur and as a teenager before that I wanted to do things that were going to build on the progress that was made, and that we would, collectively as a society, improve and make our country a more perfect nation. So as I got into the real estate business, I realized, and as I got in as an adult, I realized things were a little different. So the first deal I mentioned to you, 2100 Martin Luther King Avenue, when I worked on that project, I was 26 years old when I started that, Donahue's age. And so I was very proud of the work we were doing there. It was an economically neglected area that had been in the commercial corridor, had been damaged by the 1968 riots after Dr. King's assassination. It was a city that was 70% Black. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., as was my mother and her 4 sisters. And so I'm a Washingtonian, born and raised there. And I'm going to build a building that's going to help kickstart economic revitalization in a city that is predominantly Black, in a community that is predominantly Black and desperately needs it. And so I was very proud of that. And so one day in my office, I got a call from a reporter at the Washington Post. And so I figured they were calling me to, write a story, good news story, young African-American building a development project in the city. And instead they focused on the fact that I had been mentored by the mayor, and somehow there was something wrong with the deal. It wasn't, they had no interest in looking at the positive aspect, but they wanted to see if there was something wrong. Somehow, because I was Black and Marion Barry was Black, that the city was doing something wrong by doing business with me. And I couldn't understand it. I mean, I struggled with trying to figure out what in the heck, what is this? It made no sense. And I ended up on the front page of the Washington Post about this deal, about whether the city was overpaying me in rent when they were willing to pay considerably more money to a white developer and had made an offer to do that in writing. And but yet something was wrong because it was me. And that shaped me and surprised me. And so throughout my career, but that prepared me a little bit about what I would deal with. Every time I wanted to build my business and take it to the next level, I was met with obstacles. One of them was the white established media, and how they rarely, if ever, wrote a positive story about a Black business person, because that was not an area that they wanted us to participate in. And so as throughout my career, there has never, ever been a deal that was easy or a layup. I mean, ever. So, and I have watched a business where people, I mean, I like to give an example. There's one of the biggest transactions in Manhattan this year is a sale of the Coca-Cola building for almost $1 billion. Okay, that's not the biggest deal in New York City, but it's a pretty damn big deal.
Yeah.
Now, and the way the $1 billion deals get capitalized is how I explained before. Debt of 65%, 35% equity. So now the person who led the development to buy that building came to New York less than 20 years ago, I think, from Israel, working as a taxi driver or a taxi dispatcher, something like that. Wow. And so, man, the guy came a long way. More power to him. Really proud of that and happy for him. But 6 months prior to closing his financing for that building, he pled guilty to felony tax evasion. So nobody said a thing. He got money from institutional lenders. In fact, it was so bad that according to news reports, Coca-Cola wouldn't sell directly to him because of the tax evasion. But yet, so someone else had to buy it. Then they flipped it to this group for $40 or $50 million more. And then global institutional banks who won't lend our people a dime, they made $1 billion in financing to this guy.
Wow.
And so I look at that, and then I look at how scrutinized we as developers do and how young aspiring African-American entrepreneurs get scrutinized. And I remember asking people, some bankers, how the heck did you guys do a loan like this? And they said, well, we looked at the deal. If he blows it, we'll take the building back. And, but when it comes to minority developers and minority entrepreneurs, they look at the sponsor first and vet them to the nth degree. And if they don't bat 1,000 or 900, then they're not doing the deal with them. That is an absurdly unfair standard. And then private equity is actually worse. And because out of the $69 trillion in private equity and venture capital, minorities of color and women combined get less than 1.3% of that money. Think about that. So
that's crazy.
The unfair system is so unfair that somebody has to do something about it. It's like saying, for Black developers, it's like saying, hey, you're a race car driver, we're going to give you a Ferrari, and you're going to go across the country. And by the way, the other guys are going to have Fords, but they're going to get to stop at a gas station every 50 to 100 miles. You got to get coast to coast without a single gas station. Okay, so because we know the fuel that funds real estate is money, access to capital. So what I found also, which was alarming, is that big chunk, that 35%, mostly comes from private equity funds. Who are the biggest investors in private equity funds? Government, public employee pension systems, and corporate and manufacturing pension systems. And so those pension systems are reflective of a very different, very diverse workforce. And so as a result of that, it's actually, Black and brown and women's money.
Yeah.
And so I found that system to be so unfair that we can't get access to it. So I've tried to go out and raise mine. And so the pushback that we get is, hey, you haven't done a fund before. So, okay, well, the building we're finishing up in Manhattan is bigger than the whole fund. And that's one building. So we've been doing it for 36 years. So, and this is a real estate investment. It's not a financial calculation that you can simply do, on a spreadsheet or look at an analyst report. You got to actually execute here. So we're very good at doing that. And we've been doing it for 36 years. And then the other thing is that how are you going to find enough, and I hear this a lot, how are you going to find, qualified sponsors? Like there's a shortage of qualified Black sponsors. I mean, the real estate industry as a whole, Black commercial real estate entrepreneurs overall are a fraction of 1% of the industry. And I mean, a fraction of 1% compared to our demographics and population of 13%. So of course there's no shortage. And then how are we going to know that these sponsors can execute? So it's the same stuff that everybody else has heard. And so I am dedicating a big part of, the latter part of my career to providing capital to talented entrepreneurs who have had to overcome the most unfair capital system that anyone could imagine experiencing, and prove that not only is that to make something fair a good thing, but it'll result in superior returns. And so where everybody can help out is they should start calling these controllers and these treasurers of their states and demanding that the private equity funds that are allocators start investing in minority firms, and we have more Black-owned private equity funds. I mean, think about it. It's very simple. All 99.9% of the allocators of private equity capital are white men. So they're going to do business with people that they're comfortable with and that they know, because that's efficient and easy for them. So, and where's that go? It leaves us out. Yeah. And so until we change that, we're not going to see greater opportunity, because Black entrepreneurs are going to spend 4 and 5 times more of their time than their white counterparts simply raising capital as opposed to doing business and growing their business. Imagine, I want everybody listening to this, imagine that you're in a world where you have a good idea, the money's available like that. That's what white entrepreneurs get. Mm-hmm. So imagine how far we would go. And by the way, imagine what other issues it solves: mass incarceration, education for our children, jobs, closing the home ownership gap, closing the wealth gap. But until we get fair access to capital, we're never going to do it, because we're going to always be trying to struggle just to get ahead. And then we're going to receive loans from predators who are going to give factoring loans and other things. So the thing that we can do is demand, because most of these controllers and treasurers are elected, and they're elected by our vote. And we should be talking to them and demanding that they provide fair access to capital, and that the capital deployment ought to be reflective of the population demographics. Definitely. So how in the world, like New York State, New York City, New York City has got a population diversity of 69% minority. So a fair system would be 69% of all of the capital. Right. Minority. Imagine what a world we'd have if that were the case. Right. But instead, a minority dominates the capital. And of course, that minority then controls the wealth. 40,000 people out of 8.5 million residents in New York City control half the wealth and income.
Wow.
Wow, that's wild. And I would say, on the entrepreneur side, quickly, anyone listening that's a real estate entrepreneur who's struggled to find capital, it is our job to do the work and actually execute too, right? So Peebles Corporation's going out, sticking their neck out to raise the capital. The objections, it's our job to polish, train, execute, and do the best job that we can do so that we, again, make your fund successful and your corporation successful in this initiative, which ultimately means more capital long-term for everyone. So anyone listening on that side, there's two pieces to it. We have to do our part as well. And I want to be mindful of your time. And I know you all came here for sports, not real estate. So if you're okay with 2 minutes of just wrapping up with the sports debate, who you think, or Spurlock, you take it over. What's the debate topic?
Yeah, we can head into the NBA. Just a quick question. I know you guys have ties to DC, Miami, New York, Detroit. Who are your favorite teams and favorite players growing up? I know the DMV area had greats like Kevin Durant, Elgin Baylor. Who do you guys root for?
I'll go first. I've always been a Los Angeles Laker fan. I was a Milwaukee Buck fan. I tell you, it's very simple. I was a Milwaukee Buck fan. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar moved from Milwaukee to LA. I became an LA fan. And I used to like the Knicks because of Frazier and Earl Monroe. But I've been a Laker fan from then on, from Kareem to Magic and then Kobe, who I think was the best basketball player ever to play the game. And in terms of pure basketball player, that's Shaq. So that's been my favorite team. As a kid, before that, I watched the Bullets and Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes, the Big E, Phil Chenier, and that's the last time they won a championship. And I think it's going to be a drought for a while.
Right.
And then the Heat, because of Shaq and Dwayne Wade. But now I'm not sure. I still like the Lakers, but I like the Clippers.
Wow.
Leonard became probably the best pure basketball player in the game today.
Okay.
Wow.
And Donahue, how about you?
Growing up mostly down in South Florida, take all the Miami teams, especially my Miami Heat right here. Unfortunately, there's always been a disconnect between my favorite team and my favorite player. I think your favorite team is kind of where you were in fourth grade, and you kind of just got to stick with them and you ride the emotional highs and lows a little bit. I think your favorite player is a lot about ethos, right? It's a lot about what's meaningful to you and who embodies that. And for me, it was Kobe Bryant for a while, and Russell Westbrook for a long time. And
what about Iverson? What about Iverson?
I was gonna say, man,
it was good. It's just hard for me to recollect how I felt. I loved Allen Iverson in first, second, third, fourth grade. When he was Philadelphia on Iverson, once he went over to Denver Nuggets, had some setbacks, had some injuries, he wasn't the same guy.
Allen Iverson was your favorite player.
We're getting the truth.
We're getting the truth. We are getting the truth. Hey, but
now my favorite player and my favorite team line up. You gotta love how Jimmy Butler approaches the game of basketball. You gotta love it. And watching him and the rest of our guys go to battle every night is a lot of fun. That's the kind of culture and ethos that I like to bring to everything that I do. And so it's really cool to watch that in an organization I've rooted for since I was a kid.
If it makes you feel better, Donahue.
Clearly the best player in the league.
I just can't relate being
best
more gifted than everybody else.
Yeah, so to be fair, Donahue, my favorite player of all time is AI. Now my favorite player is Damian Lillard. So
but really so fun to watch.
But AI, just the underdog, man. I loved how small he was, but he played a big man's game every game. So I try to take that approach as well, being kind of that underdog, and you just kind of keep on grinding, right? So to your point about Jimmy Butler, yeah.
Only
I wasn't 6'5". That's the truth. We're all lucky to be 6'5". But I mean, there was a chasm between what he could do and what everybody else could do. So coordinated, so quick, so intuitive. I mean, a hell of a player. I mean, can I say that? A heck of a player.
Yeah, no, you can say it. Fair game on REIT Ball.
The branded athletic attire I've ever worn was an Iverson shirt. Period.
Yeah.
I wore to my wife.
The red I3, that you still wear that.
Yeah, it's in my drawer still. But I don't think the team, the Miami Heat, are gonna have a happy ending. But I mean,
we're gonna get a game. We're gonna get a game. It's gonna be a 5-game series. We're gonna get a game.
I don't know about that.
Okay, we're gonna get a scheduling game. Hopefully, Anthony Davis and LeBron James win 3, and they say we're gonna take Game 4 off and come back for Game 5.
Okay.
I mean, the Lakers be able to do it 2 times in a row when everybody's watching next year.
Next year, everyone's watching.
All right, we will
go back to games with fans next year. Hopefully that happens.
Yeah, seriously.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah. So you guys, I was going to wrap it.
We'll wrap it up with this question. NBA Finals, who wins? Is there an asterisk? Before you guys answer, I just want to. I did some research, and I found asterisks throughout the entire NBA history. From the fact that KD and Clay didn't play last year. Warriors beat the Heat. I mean, the Cavs without Kyrie and Love. Over half of Boston's championships were with less than 10 teams in the league. So do you think there's an asterisk, and why is this the first year that there might be an asterisk?
I'm letting you go first because I'd like the last word. That's why.
Well, you'll get that with me. God will, right? So look, I think you're right. There's an asterisk with everyone. I mean, I believe that San Antonio was going to beat Golden State when they were up by almost 30 points on Mother's Day.
Yep.
And before that guy stepped on Kawhi Leonard's foot in my game, they were done, and that would have been an end of the dynasty. So I believe that there are asterisks for many of them, and so I mean I think that the Lakers will win. They'll win it in 4, I believe that they'll have some asterisk. I mean, think about Houston won a championship with Hakeem Olajuwon and Drexler, I think, during a shortened season in the NBA because of a strike. So here we got a shorter season, and no fans. So I think it'll be because of the lack of fans, it will be less impactful. No parade, no fans. So it'll be a championship, but it won't have the same thunder, which will ignite, I think, re-energize LeBron to come back next year. Anthony Davis will feel better, and they'll come back next year, and they'll kill it. Rondo will play another year, and I think they'll roll along for a while.
Definitely.
Yeah. Materially, there are no disagreements there. Lakers taking 4 or 5, as unfortunate as that is, just top-end talent wins basketball games, and the Lakers have more of that. But is there an asterisk? I mean, sure, it's different. But part of why we watch sports is to watch really talented people respond to changing circumstances and deal with adversity. And that happens on the court with different scheme changes against different players. That happens on the court with injuries. That happens off the court with suspensions. Each and every one of those guys, every single game, every single year, is dealing with personal and family issues just like the rest of us. There are a lot of things that can distract or derail an NBA championship team. I mean, look at the 2004 Lakers that dropped in 5 to the Pistons. Infighting and personal egos beat them, not basketball players. And so, I think if we agree that the success of an NBA team revolves around responding to adversity and overcoming obstacles that were unforeseeable, then this season should have an asterisk behind it but not to make it less valuable, but to make it more valuable. Because the challenges that these NBA players have faced in order to be successful this year pale in comparison to any that folks have faced before, but for some of the championships during the civil rights movement. We've got a global pandemic where many of the players have lost family members and friends, and we have a large-scale social unrest that's attacking systemic inequality and systemic racism that has affected the vast majority of those individuals' lives that they've been on the floor. What everybody who's doing, who's playing, is pretty amazing.
Definitely. I mean, I'd have to agree. I'm 100% Laker fan, and this is our number 17, and I'm gonna hold that banner up just like I hold up any others. If there's a virtual parade, I'll be there. So no asterisk from me. No asterisk from me.
Of course, unless they lose. But unless they lose. They lose. You know what?
The greatest upset in NBA Finals history,
For
for Pistons over Lakers.
Yeah. Well, sure. Well, hey, thank you guys. I know we ran over, but we truly appreciate your time. You know, Mr. Peebles met you a couple years ago, and every time we interact, I feel inspired. I feel motivated, and you help want me to always do more. So thank you for that. And Donahue, thank you for just being part of our next generation and continuing the good work and doing meaningful projects, meaningful investments. I look forward to, you know, doing them together, you know, and thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for your perspective. We can't do anything in this industry without leaders like both of you. So thank you for that.
Definitely. Thank you guys.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye-bye. Man, so that was awesome. Just exited the room. CEO of the Peebles Corporation, Mr. Don Peebles, along with his son, Chief of Staff, Donahue Peebles. Both of them they dropped some gems this episode. Learned a lot. Hopefully listeners, they took a lot out of that as well.
Definitely. Great interview. Like Mark said, they gave out a lot of information. We'll do our best over the next couple of episodes to try to connect more of those dots for you guys so you can digest all the information and succeed in whatever you're doing. But like always, make sure you like, share, tell a friend about our podcast. We're going to continue to give out a lot of good information, continue on this ride and roller coaster with us, and we'll hope to teach you more down the road.
All right. Take care, everyone. Until next time.
All right. Peace.